Hello, my name is Slade O'Brien. I'm the Florida Director of Americans for Prosperity, and welcome to AFP's Tallahassee Days. I truly want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to get on a bus and come up to Tallahassee to work on the issues that matter most right here in Florida. And now I'd like to introduce you to our Policy Director, Abigail MacGyver. We're going to have a conversation about the political landscape in Tallahassee and the issues that we're going to be talking about while we're up there. Abby, you're a Tallahassee veteran. Can you talk to us a little bit about the political culture and the political environment in Tallahassee?
Well, for a really long time, the people who have had the most influence in Tallahassee are the lobbyists that are paid to be there by special interest groups and not necessarily the citizens. So it's really important for groups like ours to bring activists up to Tallahassee to make sure that the elected officials are not just hearing from paid lobbyists, but also hearing from the taxpayers and getting the perspective of everyday Floridians.
Last summer, Abigail and I got together and decided to come up with an agenda that the Tea Party movement, the 9/12 movement, those of us that believed in liberty could rally around and actually make a difference in Tallahassee, that we could drive the legislative agenda moving forward. And we're in a unique situation. We knew that we had a Republican governor, we knew we would have a Republican House, and we knew we would have a Republican Senate. And no matter what happened in the election, that was still going to be the same. Some of the faces may change, that's true, but we were still going to have that supermajority in Tallahassee. And when you have that type of supermajority, it is inexcusable that you can't pass a serious reform agenda. Look at Governor Scott Walker in Wisconsin, a Democratic state. This governor ran on a reform agenda and got elected in a Democratic state. He passed his reform agenda. Now granted, it wasn't easy. The Senate left and went to Illinois. There was recall elections. But at the end of the day, a guy who ran on a reform agenda got reelected by more votes and a greater margin of victory than his first election. We can do the same thing here in Florida. But it takes you. It takes you getting involved. And so again, I want to thank you for being on this trip. Abby, let's talk about the Five for Florida agenda and what we tried to accomplish in crafting it and where we think it's going to go.
Well, Five for Florida is just what you mentioned. It's a proactive plan. So it's real solutions that we know, if implemented by the legislature this year, will make an immediate impact on Florida's families and Florida's businesses and anyone looking to Florida to come here to either expand a business or come here for a job. So we came up with our 5 key points, again, that we know will make an immediate change and that we know the legislature could implement this year. Number 1, we need to reform our tax system. We need to eliminate corporate welfare and we need to eliminate cronyism. Number 2, we should reform pensions. They're unsustainable and we need to be promising taxpayers and retirees something that we can actually fulfill in the future. Number 3, we need to increase school choice. We need to continue to allow parents to be in control of their children's education, not bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. Number 4, we need to encourage government transparency and accountability in state spending. Nearly $50 billion a year in state dollars is spent on outside contracting with very little review and very little transparency. We need accountability. And number 5, we need to free up entrepreneurs to pursue the American dream by eliminating red tape and bureaucracy at both the state and the local levels. And we know, because it's been proven all around the country, if these ideas are implemented, our state of Florida will be better, the taxpayers will be better off, and we will have an increased economic boom.
That's terrific. You know, one of the things that I'm often asked is how do we compete with Texas and Utah and South Dakota, other states that are doing very, very well economically. And I think part of the challenge that we really need to address is, do we really want to compete with Texas and Utah and South Dakota, or do we want to compete with Hong Kong and Singapore and Taiwan? These are mature economies that are continuing to flourish, and they're doing so because they have the right regulatory policy, the right tax policy, and the right education system that allows it to flourish. Free marketers, entrepreneurs, CEOs, businessmen big and small, business people big and small, all flock to those places to do business. We need to create an environment and platform here in Florida where we don't pick winners and losers, but we invite everybody to come in and to flourish here in the Sunshine State. Let's go into a little bit more detail about the Five for Florida plan. The first plank of the plan is make taxes fair and end corporate welfare. You know, we've really kind of changed the debate as far as corporate welfare is concerned in Florida. If you remember, just last year, there was an energy bill that passed the House and the Senate with only 5 people voting no. That energy bill contained tax credits for green energy companies to come to Florida. You, as well as other patriots, rallied when that bill got passed, and we tried to get the governor to veto the bill. Unfortunately, he didn't. He signed it and allowed it to become a law. But again, the conversation has changed so much because just a year ago, nobody was talking about tax incentives. Nobody was talking about should government be picking winners and losers in the marketplace. Today in Tallahassee, that's the talk all over Tallahassee and the Capitol. And that's because of the work that we've done together. We teamed up with Integrity Florida to release a report on Enterprise Florida, the state's public-private economic development arm, just a few weeks ago, and it's created quite the stir in Tallahassee. We reviewed the fact that many of the incentive programs that are out there have been complete bust. They haven't created the jobs that are necessary, and some of the companies, quite frankly, have gone bankrupt in the process. Government is truly not very good at picking winners and losers in the marketplace. And we need to have an economy where everybody is welcome and every business matters. We don't give certain industries most favored nation status. So again, the Florida House and the Florida Senate and our legislators are asking the tough questions now. We'd like to see the program completely eliminated, but if it's not eliminated, we need to definitely have more transparency, more accountability, and a return on investment. One of the other areas where corporate welfare is rearing its ugly head is taxpayer money for billionaire sports owners. Abby, can you tell us a little bit about what's going on with that?
So this is something that the state of Florida has actually been doing for a long time. But again, until this year, no one's ever questioned whether handing out taxpayer dollars as incentives to companies is the right thing to do or not. They just dole out the money and don't look back. So this year, the Miami Dolphins are in Tallahassee asking for millions of dollars of taxpayer money to help renovate their pro sports stadium in Miami-Dade County. And for the first time ever, it's really being questioned whether this is the right thing to do. And the bills that are being heard in the legislature, Senate Bill 306 and House Bill 165, are moving through the committee process, but we're starting to see people asking questions about whether this is good public policy. And for the first time ever, I think that if we have enough grassroots pressure put on the legislature, we might be able to avoid having taxpayer dollars given to a billionaire owner of a sports team so that he can renovate a stadium that he doesn't want to put his own money into.
I mean, let's think about this for a minute. It's essentially the equivalent of if I owned a business, me coming to the state and asking the state to forego collecting the sales tax on my business so that I could renovate my place of business.
That's exactly what it is.
I mean, where does that make perfect sense? You know, and at the same time, you know, this stadium's already there. It's in existence, and it's a private owner of this stadium. And you know, we don't engage in Occupy talk very much here at AFP. But if you want to talk about the 1%, billionaire sports owners and millionaire athletes, they're the 1%. The fact that we would take money out of our general revenue fund, you know, the money that goes to schools and roads and bridges and services that matter, to basically help a billionaire renovate his place of business is really kind of shocking. It tells me that elected officials in Tallahassee for years just really haven't had their priorities right, and hopefully we're starting to change that.
Well, and you're right. It's about priorities. So one of the questions we've posed to the elected leaders in Tallahassee is, you know, that as citizens, we elect these representatives to go to Tallahassee to spend general revenue tax dollars to provide basic services, to pay for education and health care and infrastructure, not to give corporate welfare handouts to billionaires. So for the first time, they are questioning this, but unfortunately, the bill has been moving pretty quickly through the Senate. It has been heard once in the House, and this is not the beginning or the end of this conversation, because there are other sports teams waiting in the wings, just waiting to hop on this package. The Jaguars would like to get taxpayer dollars to renovate their stadium. The city of Orlando is pushing to have soccer fields added to the program so that they can help fund a pro soccer field in the city of Orlando. And now we're hearing about spring training facilities wanting additional money to help renovate their facilities.
Yeah, and one of the things that's happened in the process is there's been an amendment that's been added to the bill that would require a local referendum in order for it to pass. And we like the idea of a local referendum, but the issue here is there's two types of taxes. The local community is putting a bed tax or a hotel tax in order to come up with their share of the funds, but the state is it's statewide general funds, and nobody in the state gets to vote on it except for the legislature. So it's sort of a shell game, if you will, to say, hey, we're letting the local people take a vote. But the problem is that I don't live in Miami. Many people on these buses don't live in Miami. We're not getting that voice. So that's one of the things we want you to talk about while you're here in Tallahassee is to bring up the sports bills with your elected officials and really quiz them as to where they stand on this particular bill. The other thing that we'll talk about real quick with corporate welfare is whenever you give a handout to a company, what ends up happening is that company turns around and hires a cadre of lobbyists to keep that handout coming. Well, you and I know that when it comes election time, the lobbyists pool their resources together and they support the candidates of their choice. That creates a cronyism and a level of special interest within the electoral process where they become much more important to the elected official than you or I, the constituents back home. You know, Abigail, pension reform has been a hot topic all across the country. We all saw what took place in Wisconsin. There's been referendums out in California, I think in San Diego and San Mateo. The pension system is simply unsustainable, and there's a lot of different ways of addressing the problem. I thought that we came up with a fairly clever idea last summer in our Five for Florida plank, in that we know the program's unsustainable, but we also know we've made promises to the people in the program. And you really can't change somebody's deal in the middle of the deal, especially somebody that's been there for 15 or 20 years or near in retirement. That wouldn't be fair. But we also know that this is an unsustainable program. It's a fire that's sort of raging out of control, and every person that's new to the program is like putting another log on that raging fire. And so we came up with the simple solution of just simply stop doing it for all new employees. I mean, any new employee would go in a 401k program instead of in a pension program, and we'd slowly be weeding those people off. Moving forward. So what's kind of happening with that particular plank? Who's running with it, and where does it stand in Tallahassee?
Well, we were really excited when Speaker Will Weatherford decided as incoming speaker to make pension reform one of his key priorities. And his proposal is exactly what we recommended, to place all new state employees into a 401k style plan rather than the current default pension plan that, as you mentioned, is unsustainable. And the fact of the matter is that if we keep adding people to the current pension plan, our unfunded liabilities will continue to grow, and that will result in huge tax increases on the people of the state of Florida.
Every year, we have to take money from general revenue to make up the shortfall in the pension program. Is that correct?
While currently the state of Florida contributes about $5.5 billion a year. Billion dollars a year to the Florida pension plan. And that is not only to cover state employees who actually make up a smaller portion of the pension plan compared to teachers and local government employees and college and university employees, but also, as you mentioned, to make up for the unfunded liabilities. Here's the catch with these pension plans, and a lot of the supporters of the current pension plan like to tell you that our pension plan is one of the best funded pension plans in the United States. And they quote numbers between 80 and 85% funded for our pension plan. However, these funded numbers that they're telling everyone about are based on faulty assumptions. And an assumption is how much money they think they're getting as a return on their investment for that plan.
Right.
So they're basing these numbers of 80 to 85% funded on assumptions of receiving 7.75% returns on investment.
Nobody's gotten that in a while.
Well, over the last 12 years, the pension plan has received an average of 3.3%. So less than half what they are saying the plan is actually receiving.
So to get this straight, it's only 85% funded, and that being 85% funded at a rate of return that they're not actually receiving, so it's even going to be worse as we go forward in the future.
Exactly, and it's a total Ponzi scheme. So right now they know that the only way that they could potentially pay out in the future is if they keep adding new enrollees to the program, therefore taking the money that should be going to help support that new enrollees' retirement in the future, and using it to pay out the retirement for people who are currently retired. So it's a Ponzi scheme just like Social Security. It's
Right.
unsustainable. Other states around the country are starting to really suffer. I believe the feds just actually filed suit against the state of Illinois for misleading on how unfunded their pension plan was. And so it's something that has to be addressed. And, you know, the shocking thing is the state of Michigan, one of the heaviest union states in the country, did this same reform in 1997.
Interesting.
And since
so
then,
this is not new.
This is not a new idea. And if it can happen in Michigan, we know it can happen in Florida. And
So-
they've managed to save the taxpayers $4 billion in unfunded liabilities since then by moving all new state employees into a 401k plan instead of the broken pension plan.
Okay, so the speaker's running with this in the House. So we got a lot of confidence that it'll get out of the House. Okay, but what's happening in the Senate?
The Senate is not as warm to the idea. They need some encouragement. They need a lot of encouragement, frankly.
And one of the things I think that came out of the Senate is they want to make this a voluntary switch, not a mandatory switch. And that really doesn't solve the problem at all.
It doesn't solve the problem. Right now, state employees have the choice to go into the investment plan or the pension plan, and less than 20%, I think it's actually more like 10%, actually choose to go into the investment plan. The other majority, large majority, all go into the pension plan. And they do it because the promises of the future retirement benefits are hard to pass up because they're being promised such lofty amounts of money when they retire.
Right. Now, there's also a local pension bill. Tell us a little bit about that.
So there's a great bill that's moving through both the House and the Senate that will require local pension plans to use more conservative assumptions when they're coming up with their funded liabilities. Because yes, the state has an issue with their unfunded pension plan, but the problem is even worse at the local government level. We have about half of our local governments that are far underfunded. And again, they're still using, their plans look grossly underfunded, even using the high assumptions. The numbers that were quoted in committee yesterday when the Senate bill was being heard for the second time were saying that these local governments are using that 7.75% assumption, but many of them have been receiving returns as low as 1 and 2% a year. So their actual unfunded liabilities are very, very scary, and that will result in huge tax increases on those local governments in the future if they don't catch up with it and start being more honest about the situation.
So no matter what happens, we're going to end up needing to bail these programs out in some way, shape, or form in order for the folks to get paid what they were promised, or there's going to have to be some kind of negotiation. So again, what we're strongly suggesting, and thank goodness that the Speaker of the House has taken it up, is let's stop putting people into these programs. We're going to have to deal with the folks that are in the program. We know that, but let's stop adding new folks to the program. So please, when you go and you meet with your legislators, this is one of the topics that we definitely want you to talk about.
Absolutely, and this will be an issue that we will address at our opening rally when you all arrive in Tallahassee, because we really need to let the Speaker know how much we support and thank him for taking on what is a very challenging issue. And we also need to communicate to the Senate that this is vitally important, not just for now, but for future generations, because this is going to cause huge financial burdens on our children and our grandchildren in the future.
Good deal. Number 3 of our 5 for Florida plan is to be stewards of good, transparent government. You know, almost 60% of our state budget is conducted in the form of contracts for goods and services. What we learned from CFO Jeff Atwater last year is that those contracts don't have accountability standards, a review process, and some of them are written so poorly that you'd be shocked that we're even approved it to begin with. Can you tell us where we stand on the accountability in the contracts?
We really have to thank CFO Atwater for making this his key priority issue. He started talking with the legislature about this last year, and this year he continues to push forward. He released a website last year called the FACTS, F-A-C-T-S website, where he started putting state contracts online. Mm-hmm. However, it's not a requirement. So currently, Florida does have some of the best sunshine laws in the state of Florida, which requires all of our records to be public. But that doesn't mean that they're all accessible. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes you have to be able to know exactly what it is you're looking for and make the public records request, which can sometimes take months at a time, to be able to get information about these contracts, deals, or really any records.
And they're not all posted in one place either. They're all over the place.
Right. It turns out there's 9 different websites that Florida government runs where they post different records and different information. So that's one of the issues that's been being discussed. The issue's being championed in the Senate this year, and the committee released their bill this week, and it was heard this week. And will go straight to the floor after it was positively reviewed this week. And what they're going to do is they're going to establish one website where all of this different information that's currently scattered over a number of different websites will be accessible. And they're really focusing on trying to make it a user-friendly site, because currently with a lot of the sites, if you don't know exactly what you're looking for, you're not going to be able to figure out what's happening. If you don't know the name of a vendor or an exact contract, you're not going to be able to get general information.
And so this would give any citizen the opportunity to go to one place and to look through these contracts and to really find out if we're getting $1 worth of service or goods for $1 worth of taxes, correct?
Exactly. And to go back to our number 1 point a little bit about corporate welfare and Enterprise Florida, there's also legislation that's moving through the process and has passed unanimously in all of its committees in both the House and the Senate so far that will require Enterprise Florida to put all of their information online as well in a publicly accessible website, detailing out the money that's being doled out and the jobs that are being promised, and also follow-up information about what's being delivered. So there is a huge push this year to bring more accountability and more transparency to the way that state dollars are being spent, so that not only the state of Florida can know where everything is going, but also that the citizens of Florida can know.
And so it should be relatively easy to pass something like this. What could possibly stand in the way of common sense reform like this becoming law?
The same thing that stands in the way of all common sense reform becoming law: special interest lobbyists. Again, citizens are not the main voice in Tallahassee. Mm-hmm. We don't have lobbyists in the halls every day, all day, talking to members. But special interest groups do. And there is a lot of money, again, 60% mm-hmm. of the state budget that is being spent on these contracts. And all of those organizations that are receiving those contracts have a paid lobbyist in Tallahassee fighting to get them that money.
Interesting.
So there's a huge amount of financial interest from people who have who have hired lobbyists in Tallahassee right. to make sure that these contracts don't go public, aren't held more accountable. They don't want accountability for this. They just want to be able to get the money and walk away.
So lobbyists aren't just in the business of trying to get laws passed or not passed. They actually do quite a few other things in Tallahassee, and it relates to 60% of our budget.
Exactly. They're very heavily involved in the procurement process and getting state contracts, and about $50 billion a year in taxpayer dollars are spent on these contracts. It's a good business.
And they're here for the entire session. They're involved in the campaigns. They bundle money for their favorite elected officials. And it puts us at a disadvantage, Joe Public at a disadvantage in trying to get good things passed. So
It
again,
does.
this is one of the things that while you're here, it's really important that we stress that we want this accountability and transparency in these contracts moving forward. Number 4 in our 5 for Florida plan was empower kids with the best education possible. You know, Florida's actually made some pretty good strides over the last decade in the education department, but we still have a long way to go. There's still kids that are trapped in failing schools. There's still kids that don't graduate, they're not at the right reading level. And if you're going to attract businesses to a state, if you're going to attract entrepreneurs to a state, you got to have a quality education system, both primary and secondary.
There are a few really great bills out there in addition to parent empowerment. So there's a bill relating to disabled students.
Mm-hmm.
Currently, if a school or a local school district decides that your child is disabled, they create an education plan and the parent has no say whatsoever. But that child will be marked as a disabled student for the rest of their educational career in the public school system. So this bill makes the district involve the parent in that education plan, makes the parent have to sign off on that education plan before it can be implemented. Because there's a lot of students out there that at a young age might need a little extra help, but could have the potential to go into regular classes and to move on to college. But if you graduate with a special education stigma or lesser of a degree because they
Right.
don't get the same high school diploma that a regular student does, that limits your chances for the future. And it marks them, whether it happens in kindergarten, 3rd grade, 5th grade, it marks them and it changes their ability to achieve for the rest of their academic career.
And it sounds like it's a one-size-fits-all government program regardless of what your disability may be or the severity of that disability?
Exactly. So it's left up to school bureaucrats to decide what's going to happen for your child's entire future if your child has any sort of disability.
And so this bill would stop that from
This bill
happening
would
in the
stop that
future.
from happening and make the districts involve the parents and get the parents sign off before they can put a stigma of disabled on a student.
Okay. Well, you know, one of the things that's become very popular over the last few years is charter schools. And there are good charter schools and there are bad charter schools. But talk a little bit about where the legislature is with the charter schools. Are we going to be seeing more of them? Are we going to be seeing less of them? What's sort of the accountability with the charter schools as well?
Well, charter schools have continued to grow in Florida, and that's because studies have shown repeatedly that charter schools are outperforming traditional schools. And there's a waiting list. I think last year the waiting list was about 20,000 students waiting to get into a charter school. So they are very popular and they are continuing to grow. And the legislature does have a couple bills out this year that will allow high-performing charter schools to continue to grow, will allow universities that have educational programs, so therefore teaching new teachers to open up charter schools for K through 8, I believe. I think currently they can only do high school charters. So there's a lot of options out there that can allow charter schools, good charter schools, high-performing charter schools to continue to flourish and grow and continue to create more access to students out there who decide that the charter school option is better than the traditional school option is for them. But as you mentioned, there are bad charter schools out there as well. There's not a lot, but there certainly do exist. And so the state is also looking at some accountability measures for charter schools because we don't want bad charter schools to flourish. We want good charter schools to flourish. So they're looking at providing some accountability, making sure that those bad charter schools are going to be shut down or are going to be made better, and only increasing the really good charter schools.
Got it. You know, a lot of kids are also taking classes online. What's happening with virtual schools?
Virtual schools continue to grow as well. They've done some great pieces of legislation the last couple years to continue offering more virtual options to students, as not only in the primary schools, but in secondary schools, online is becoming such a key way to receive education. So there's a lot of continuity, however, that needs to happen as far as digital learning, where some students can access and others can't. You have to have been enrolled in these types of programs to be able to access others, or you have to, students in these grades can access these programs, but students in other grades can't. So there's just a lot of cleanup that needs to happen as far as access to digital education that will allow students to access more of it. And again, these are just options. These aren't things that are required, but some students have more success with digital learning. In addition, it's really beneficial for students that are in more rural communities because their schools may not offer an advanced physics class, but they might be able to take an advanced physics class online through one of the larger school districts. So being able to make sure that students all around the state have equal access to digital education is very important.
Okay, so from a standpoint of our activists that are going to be in Tallahassee for the next day or two, what specifically should they be talking to their legislators about?
They should just continue talking to their legislators about how important it is for parents and students to be in control of their education, and how these choices and increasing these choices continue to make our education system better in Florida. So the more access and the more options we can provide to our students, the better performing our students will be.
Number 5 in our 5 for Florida plan is to free entrepreneurs to pursue the American dream. Florida is often thought of as a pro-business state. However, according to the Institute for Justice, we have the 4th most onerous and burdensome barriers to entry for small and medium-sized businesses. This is kind of crazy when you think about it. We're so over-regulated in this state, and a lot of the reason for that is the trade associations, and again, the lobbyists that keep creeping into this conversation today. They build these regulations and barriers to keep other people from joining into their businesses.
Exactly.
So what's happening on that front?
Well, like you mentioned, there are a lot of special interests who create these protectionist measures, create new regulations every single year, new licenses every single year. There's a good one this year. Someone's trying to make pool cleaners have to be licensed as pool contractors. So to be able to clean a pool, you would have to be a fully licensed pool contractor and able to build a pool. So that right there is going to not only make it so that people can't enter into the business of cleaning pools, but it's also going to make everyone who has a pool have to pay more money, because now they're going to have to pay a licensed contractor to do it instead of just a pool cleaner.
Think about this for a second. We still have an unemployment rate that's higher than the national average. Florida is basically a service-oriented state. We don't have a lot of manufacturing down here, but we do have a lot of pools. I mean, how easy would it be for somebody who is unemployed to start a pool business and be able to start earning an income? But yet we're talking about making that person be a contractor in order to clean a pool.
Exactly. It's ridiculous. But these are the types of things that happen every single year. And that is the exact reason why the Institute for Justice found that Florida is the 4th most onerously licensed state in the country. So one of the most important things, frankly, that we could do immediately to help small businesses and large businesses alike is to reduce those regulatory burdens, reduce the licensing burdens, decrease licensing fees and permitting fees, not only at the state level, but also at the local level. A bill that we're supporting this year that is a great bill that was just heard in its 2nd committee in the House this last week, would require local governments to post on the State Department of Economic Opportunity's website all of their local licensing and permitting regulations and fees. So it would detail out every local jurisdiction's burdens and costs for either starting a new business in their area or starting a new construction project.
That's great, because that gives the business person who wants to open up a new shop or move a manufacturing plant or whether it's a small business or a large business, the information they need to be able to compare city by city, county by county, which local area has the greatest advantage for them and the least burdens of opening that business. That sounds like a
Absolutely.
great bill.
And this bill is getting bipartisan support because it doesn't matter what your political persuasion is. You know that fees and regulations are burdens to people starting new businesses.
Great.
And so not only is it getting bipartisan support, but the Florida Chamber came out in support of it last week. So this is a really great bill. It will really get it moving forward. And frankly, it might require or force those local jurisdictions to really seriously take a look and examine what it is that they're charging and the burdens that they're putting in front of people to start a business or to do construction in their area.
Great. So, Abby, it sounds to me like every single plank of our Five for Florida plan has a bill, at least one bill, that's going through the legislature this session. We've talked about a lot of these bills today. How are the activists going to keep up with it, and what should they do when they walk into each legislator's office?
Well, when you look into the packet that you've been given when you got on the bus today, there's a legislative priorities handout that lists not only the bills that we've specifically talked about, but any of the other priority bills that fall under the different issues that we've discussed. You can also see in your packet a handy little card that we've included that gives you a link to both our legislative priorities and our larger bill tracking list. Because there are dozens of additional bills that we're following, even if they aren't priorities that we support and oppose. There's just only so much information that we can put on as a priority list.
Sure. And so when you go visit your legislator, talk about the issues on this list that are the most important to you, that you feel the most comfortable about, that you're the most passionate about. But leave the legislative priorities behind. Let them know that they're going to be judged on the AFP scorecard by how they vote on these particular issues, right?
Absolutely. And we have extra copies of this legislative priorities list. So feel free to leave them behind in all of the offices that you visit. We'll make sure that you have copies that you can take home with you.
Okay. Now, one of the biggest issues this legislative session that we haven't covered yet is the healthcare exchanges and expansion of Medicaid. Let's talk about the healthcare exchange first and where we stand with that.
These really have been priority issues for us this year. In my opinion, they're some of the most important issues being addressed by the legislature. So these committee meetings started very early on talking about the implementation of Obamacare. And the two key issues, as you mentioned, were whether or not the state of Florida should create a health insurance exchange and whether the state of Florida should expand our current Medicaid system. Mm-hmm. So the health insurance exchange was addressed first. And luckily, both the House and the Senate decided not to implement a state-based health insurance exchange this year. Mm-hmm. This may be an issue and very likely will be an issue that will come up in future sessions, but for this year, it's off the table. So the state of Florida, what that means is the state of Florida will be relying on the federal government to create the health insurance exchange. And then in the future, the state will have the option to either continue to let the federal government run the exchange or take over the exchange or partner with them on running the exchange. Of course, we're going to continue to maintain the position that it is not in the state's interest to operate these exchanges. The funding for operating the exchange will fall on the state if they take it over, and there will be a lot of catches involved with the state taking it over. So at no point in time will it be beneficial for the state of Florida to operate an insurance exchange. So we're really happy that at least for this year, the state has decided that they're not going to operate an insurance exchange.
Okay. So we got a victory on the healthcare exchange. The next big issue that came out of Obamacare and the lawsuit that Pam Bondi filed that went all the way to the Supreme Court was expansion of Medicaid. And we won that part of the argument in the Supreme Court where we had the choice to expand it or not. So why is that even an issue right now?
Well, because the federal government is offering a huge bribe to the states to try and entice them to expand Medicaid. Mm-hmm. Like you said, the feds originally tried to say, we will only give you any Medicaid funding if you expand Medicaid, but the Supreme Court said that is unconstitutional, you can't make them do that. Mm-hmm. But they're still offering billions of dollars to the states if they'll expand Medicaid. And so what they've promised them is that if the state will expand Medicaid, our broken and very costly Medicaid program that currently takes up about 30% of our annual budget in the state of Florida, mm-hmm. that they will pay for 100% of those new enrollees for 3 years and 90% of the cost of those new enrollees in perpetuity for the future. But we know, as well as each of you knows, that you can't count on the federal government to make that funding promise in the future. I'm not even sure we can count on the federal government to make that funding promise next year, let alone in 10 years. Right before they came out with this proposal, the Obama administration just last year had already attempted to transfer $100 billion of Medicaid spending to the states from what's currently being the current pot without expansion. So certainly this is a huge financial risk to the state of Florida.
Mm-hmm.
It will, if they do decide to expand Medicaid or some alternative of expansion, it will have huge financial implications, not only for our current budget, but for our budget for decades into the future.
So let's talk about the political landscape as it relates to Medicaid expansion. We have a governor who, before he was governor, formed an organization to fight the implementation of Obamacare and the government takeover of health care. As a candidate, he said he would never expand Medicaid or Medicare. And as governor, he said it would never happen on his watch. But since November, he's come out and flip-flopped his position and has now said that he would implement a Medicaid expansion if the House and the Senate passed legislation. So the House immediately came out, Speaker of the House immediately came out after the governor made his comments and said, we're not going to expand Medicaid in the House. All of us, Tea Party groups, 912 groups, AFP, sent hundreds and thousands of emails and calls to the House and to the Senate, and the Senate had a vote on it just last week. So where do we stand with Medicaid expansion in the Senate?
The Senate last week voted to reject expansion of the traditional Medicaid program. So this seems like a small victory. However, I'm going to remain skeptical until I see sine die in 50 days. Because what they also voted to do is to support the idea of some alternative plan. And the main point of whatever alternative they craft is that they want to be able to access that big pot of federal money that's being dangled by the federal government.
So to kind of review this, when you look at Medicaid expansion, there are two reasons that we wanted to reject it. One is the program itself is a bad program, and the quality of health is not very good that comes out of it, and the doctors are not paid at 100% rate like they should, and quite a few doctors in Florida don't even take Medicaid patients. That's correct, right?
Right. 41% of doctors in the state of Florida currently reject seeing any new Medicaid patients. And that is because, as you mentioned, Medicaid pays grossly less than what a doctor will receive if from a privately insured patient. National average is about 50 cents on the dollar. In the state of Florida, it's actually less. It's only 44 cents on the dollar.
Okay, so that's the bad program side. But the other side of it is the fiscal irresponsibility, because we're really talking about taking $100 million plus from the federal government, the free money from the federal government, which isn't free, right?
It's not free. It's all taxpayer dollars. And contrary to some of the messages that have been said from the governor and other people who are supportive of Medicaid expansion, these aren't tax dollars that have been paid by Floridians to the federal government that they're trying to get back. These are taxpayer dollars we haven't spent yet. So, the federal government can't even pay the bills that they currently have. Expanding Medicaid around the country is estimated to cost the federal government a minimum, because this is a conservative estimate, $800 billion over the next 10 years.
Okay, so we're almost $17 trillion in debt. We're borrowing half the money that we spend from places around the world like China, and we're talking about expanding an entitlement program that we can't afford.
Exactly.
Okay, so the Senate comes out and says, at least temporarily, we're not going to expand Medicaid, but we're going to use that money
to expand healthcare
and try to expand it some other different way.
And call it something else.
Okay, so it's really the same thing.
Again, I'm going to remain a skeptic until I see a plan on paper. But right now, all it sounds like is that they're going to expand healthcare services using Medicaid dollars and call it something other than Medicaid. So I still have huge doubts about what's going to happen. There's even been talk of a special session to address this issue. There's huge political pressure out there since the governor came out in support of Medicaid expansion. And there are tons of interest groups out there fighting for expansion. Why? Because the hospitals think that they're going to make lots of money off of expansion, so they're spending lots of money lobbying this issue. The managed care groups that are currently slated to take on Florida's current Medicaid patients are out lobbying in favor of this. And then, of course, you have the other groups that say that this will be great to give healthcare services to the poor and needy that aren't currently getting it. But that's just not a true message. One, as you mentioned earlier, Medicaid provides dismal healthcare results. Numerous studies have shown that Medicaid patients receive worse care than uninsured patients do. And two, these are people who, the majority of whom, the population that they want to expand this to, are already currently insured by private insurance through their employer. 70% of the population they're talking about giving Medicaid to already have insurance. So all they would be doing is taking those patients off of the private insurance rolls that provide very good care, higher reimbursement rates, and doctors will actually see, and putting them on the failed, broken, and costly Medicaid program instead.
So putting more and more people onto government-run health care and forcing the taxpayers to pay for it.
Exactly.
So nanny state 101.
I just don't see any good reason for expanding this program.
And, and I think you have to also ask yourself, what's the role of government? Is government supposed to be paying for health insurance? Are we supposed to rob Peter to pay Paul?
And are we supposed to encourage people who are in a position currently to receive private insurance through the private
go to a
marketplace
government program.
to go to a government program
Right.
instead? That's exactly what President Obama wants to happen. He'd like everybody to be on government-run health care. So let's not fall for that. Let's encourage people to maintain their private insurance in the private marketplace. And let's not trap people into a poverty program by giving them a plastic Medicaid card that won't get them any health care services anyways.
2 years ago, Governor Scott rejected the stimulus money for high-speed rail, and we all applauded. And he rejected it really for three reasons. One is because at the time, where I think we were 12 trillion in debt, now we're almost 17 trillion in debt.
Over 16.
Right. And so, it was going to add to the national debt. Secondly, the federal money would eventually run out. That was clear. And third, the Florida taxpayer would end up getting stuck with the bill. There's really no difference between that high-speed rail stimulus money and this money coming down from Washington because, again, we're almost $17 trillion in debt. The federal money will run out, and the Florida taxpayer is going to be stuck with the bill. Correct?
Exactly.
Okay. I hope you found this video insightful and helpful. The 5 for Florida plan is really making progress in Tallahassee. Your coming to Tallahassee to talk to your elected officials can push us over the top. We have a lot to work on, a lot to be proud of, and we're very thankful that you've taken time out of your busy schedules to come to Tallahassee on this trip to make Florida really a better place to live, a better place